When the Son of Man comes, will he find faith on earth? These are the last words we hear of this parable in today's gospel. It calls us to think about how we are preparing for Jesus' return by the faith that we have. A great teacher, a doctor of the church of the 16th century, St. John of the Cross, in his book The Dark Night says, "Faith is the proximate preparation for union with God." Let me say that again. Faith is the proximate preparation for union with God, which means that as long as we live in this world, the closest we can come to God, the closest that we can realize the presence of God is through our faith. We'll never fully see God, we'll never fully be able to touch God, hear God's voice. It is by our faith that draws us nearest to our God. And so in those times when we don't have that intellectual certainty, we can't see the answer to our prayers, we are to go beyond ourselves, beyond our ability, and let faith bring us to that nearness of God. God desires that we become like God so that we can truly see him with our faith and not just with the eyes of fact itself. In the 2nd century, the church had another great saint, a great teacher of the church, St. Athanasius of Alexandria, taught, God became man so that man can become God. God became man so that man could become God. And every time we celebrate the Eucharist, as the priest pours a little bit of water in the wine at the preparation of the gifts at the Mass, the priest says, may we come to share in the divinity of Christ, who humbled himself to share in our humanity. So you and I are called to share in the divinity of Jesus himself, who humbled himself to take our lowly human form, so that he may raise us up and to become like him in glory. It's interesting that this word persistence has many different names in our English language, our English usage, depending on how it's used. For example, when ants are persistently pestering people as they're having their summer picnic, they're called pesky ants, although they're persistent. Politicians who natter against the flaws and the failures of their opponents, they are called relentless. It's another term that we use for persistent. And parents, when they're reminding their teenage kids to pick up after themselves and do their chores, they're simply called nags. So we use lots of terms for the word persistent, but that's basically what we mean, persistence again and again. Jesus calls us to have this prized characteristic of persistence because we want to take on the mind of Christ himself and be like God, for that is what God destines us to become. When we come to God not seeing the answer to our prayers, we come again not so much to change God's mind, to have God see things our ways, but to be able to take on the mind of Christ himself, to be molded and shaped to see God, to see things God's way, allow God to shape us and mold us to see what is the best for us, what will bring us the greatest happiness. And for us to truly become that developing Christian who has a persistence of faith, again, St. John of the Cross, that 16th century doctor of the church, gives us reasons as to why we should be persistent, because he gives us the end story of our journey in this life. He says about the faithful Christians who have come to the end of their journey in life, he says this about them in another one of his books called The Living Flame of Love. He says, our meeting with God as faithful followers of Christ will be the following way. He says, the death of Jesus' disciples is very gentle and sweet, sweeter and more gentle than was their whole spiritual life on earth. They die with the most sublime and delightful encounters of love. Equates the death of the faithful disciples of Jesus to the swan, who sings many songs during the course of their life, but as they're giving up their life, as they're dying, they make that swan song, which is the most beautiful, most sublime song of their whole life long. So St. John says to us that all the joys that we experience in the course of our lives, birthdays and Christmases and Thanksgivings, graduations, anniversaries, all the times that our families come together to celebrate and rejoice together, all those things summed together up in one, they cannot possibly match the great sublime meeting that we'll have with God that will far surpass anything that we'll ever experience in this life alone. That's something that we have to be looking forward to, and that way we want to mold ourselves into likeness, the unity with God right now. A second thing that St. John the Cross says about our death is that unlike other experiences of our life in this world, that when we come face to face with God at the end of our lives, there will be, as he says, no rejection involved at all in saying yes to God and coming to be with God. All of our other experiences in life involve an acceptance of something at the expense of rejecting something else. For example, at your supper last night, you may have chosen to have a piece of cake for your dessert, but having that piece of cake meant that you rejected having, say, an apple or some ice cream. St. John of the Cross says that when we come to God at the end of our journey, when we see God face to face, we'll see God in his awesome, unconditional love, and his tremendous greatness, his tremendous oneness with us. It's like that's all that we see, that's all that we want. That's the very cravings of our desires are being fulfilled. And there'll be no rejection, no denial whatsoever. We'll simply want God, want to be with him forever. So these things that we keep in mind at this time in our juncture of our faith life helps us to be persistent in faith, coming to God again and again with our needs, our prayers, asking not so much that God see things our ways, that we see things God's ways, because we know what God has in store for us as faithful believers. And the greatest thing that we can do in preparing to become one like God is to allow Jesus to come to make a place in our heart today. In John chapter 14, Jesus says to each of us, "If anyone loves me and keeps my commandments, I will come and dwell within them." And so by coming to God regularly, persistently, we allow Jesus to be born within us, to come and dwell within us. We'll exercise our faith muscles beyond that which we can see and feel and touch and hear, to truly accept Jesus with our faith beyond reason, beyond having in our hands. We allow God to mold and shape us more further and fully into likeness and unity with God that we will share with him forever.